Hello and welcome to the Kim Iverson Show. Thank you guys so much for joining us. I am back. Yesterday, I was just suddenly sick and could not do the show. We were about half an hour to showtime, and suddenly I just was not feeling well. I'm still under the weather, but the show must go on. So I am here. I am rallying, and we do have a really great show for you tonight. So let's just hope I don't get sick in the middle of the show. But if I do, don't worry. It's not you. It's me. If you just see me suddenly run off screen. All right. Let's get into it. First of all, the Colorado Supreme Court has ruled Trump cannot be on the ballot, citing the 14th Amendment. Now, many people are blaming this on radical Democrats and their attempts to thwart democracy, which they do. And we will be getting into that a little bit later on. But in this particular case, it's actually mostly been Republicans behind banning Trump from the ballots. And we're going to get into those details. But first, let's go over what happened in Colorado, what the lower court ruled, what the Supreme Court ruled, and what is going to happen from now on. From here, what's the happening, and also what other states might be joining in on this, what this could mean in the larger picture. So let's get to what actually happened. So the Colorado Supreme Court disqualified Trump, but they're putting a pause on it until he can appeal, until there's an appeal process on this. So they're saying that there's a stay on the decision until after the first of the year. They do believe that there will be an appeal filed, and so that's why they're putting a stay on the decision, because the Secretary of State who has to file for the ballots, they're basically saying, go ahead and operate as usual, because we figure there's going to be an appeal on this. So, they've got until January 4th or something to appeal this and for his name to still likely end up on the ballot. But let's go over what the 14th Amendment is so that we can kind of understand what the hell happened here, because this is absolutely thwarting democracy. Rather than allowing the voter to decide, now courts have decided that a person is not eligible to be running for office, which they do in a variety of other, they'll say, okay, you're not the right age, or you weren't born in the country, or, they have a variety of disqualifiers that have nothing to do with the voters. The voter could really like somebody who's 22 years old, but, says, well, you can't because of your age or something. So there is a precedent set where where the Constitution can decide who is eligible and who is not eligible. But in this particular case, the 14th Amendment, Section 3, cites that no person shall be a senator or representative in Congress or elector of the president and vice president, or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or under any state, who, having previously taken an oath as a member of Congress or as an officer of the United States or as a member of any state legislature or as an executive or judicial officer of any state to support the Constitution of the United States, shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same, or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof. But Congress may, by a vote of 2/3 of each house, remove such disability. Excuse me. You could tell it'd been coming on for a while, right? The sickness for the last few days, because I keep sneezing. Okay. So the 14th Amendment, Section 3, is saying that you cannot, if you have committed an act of insurrection or you've attempted to rebel against the state after taking an oath of office. So this does not apply to people who have not held state office of any kind, or an elected official of any kind. So me, I've never held office. If I were to attempt an insurrection or a rebellion, it actually doesn't ban me from running for office, but it does ban somebody who's already taken the oath to protect the Constitution in the United States from running for office again if they, after taking that oath, engage in an insurrection or a rebellion. Now, this was written up after the Civil War because there were, obviously a civil war. There were people that rose up against the government, the Confederacy, and they tried to overthrow, they tried to fight against the government in an insurrection or a rebellion, whatever you want to label it. And after the Civil War ended, there were a bunch of former Confederates who were appointed or who were voted in to become senators and representatives in Washington. And when they got there, people were very offended and felt like they shouldn't be sitting in those chairs as people who, were in the Confederacy. And so they wrote up this amendment and adopted it. However, even though they wrote up the amendment and they adopted it, there was a lot of pushback on that. A lot of people said, yeah, but this isn't really good for the unification of the country if we say that these Confederates, anybody who rose up, can't serve in office if they can't represent their region. Now that we're united, now that they've lost, like if you're cutting, they're already cut at the knees. If you cut them any further, it's just not going to help anything. So it was rarely actually implemented. It was pretty much ignored. And then there was actually what do they call? I guess it would be amnesty or something. They kind of wrote up this, we'll kind of ignore this. So they actually wrote, it was a law broadening the amnesty. So they did an amnesty, said, okay, yeah, you guys can actually, even though we wrote up this amendment in the Constitution, you guys still can run. And then they actually broadened that amnesty after the Spanish-American War. So they wrote this up with the intent. They were angry after the Civil War, but then they really never used it. In fact, I believe it was only invoked one time. Yeah, one time is the only time this has ever been used. And it was used to block Socialist Party of America member Victor Berger of Wisconsin. He was convicted of violating the Espionage Act for opposing U.S. entry into World War I. So he was an anti-war activist, a socialist, and that's who, of course, they decided to invoke this act against. But that's the only time that this has actually been invoked. So this is rarely used. It was considered a bad amendment, essentially, because after the Constitution was amended in Section 14th Amendment, Section 3 was added, they kind of thought, oh, okay, well, we kind of take this back. And so they wrote these amnesty laws. So the question then that has been battled in many of the states, and really this has been one of those constitutional scholar questions, is whether or not the President of the United States is actually considered an officer. Because remember, Section 3 says, no person shall be a senator or representative in Congress or elector of president and vice president or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States. So it doesn't actually state the president, saying like an elector of president. So it's kind of vague. And apparently with that vagueness, I mean, I'm not a constitutional scholar, so sometimes when it gets to the language and people start squabbling over the language, or they start squabbling over, well, what did they mean by this when they wrote this up? One of those squabbles is whether or not the President of the United States is an officer of the United States. I mean, in my mind, I would think yes. I would think that a president has to obviously take an oath. That's the one person we see the most photographs of actually swearing on their Bible or whatever it is that they're going to be protecting and defending the United States and the Constitution. That's the image that we see every time a president gets sworn into office. So in my mind, they are an officer of the United States. They're not a dictator. They're not a monarch. They're not, they're an officer to represent the people and in that capacity. But there's a lot of squabbling on that. Now, what happened in the lower court ruling was that Colorado, so all of that's important to understand, because Colorado in their district court, when they went and looked at this case, now a lot of the other states, and we're going to get into the other states that this has been brought up in, but the other states have been dismissing these cases because they've been saying, well, he hasn't been convicted of an insurrection. So you can't disqualify somebody based on insurrection or rebellion when they haven't actually been formally convicted of that charge. I mean, it's one thing to say, okay, if you're 22 years old, you can't run. Well, we're able to verify that with your birth certificate, with how old you are, right? Same thing with where you're born, even though that gets contested quite a bit. I mean, we saw that with the birther years with Obama and with John McCain, who was born, I believe, in the Panama Canal, right? And there's also, is it Ted Cruz, who wasn't born in the United States either, but in Canada or something. So there's been some disputes on things like birth, but insurrection is something really that is, you'd have to go to court. You'd have to rule that a person has actually committed the crime of insurrection. That's a crime. So other states had actually said, well, we don't know if he's even committed an insurrection, so we're just going to dismiss this on the merits. Like there's no merit here to this case. Colorado, on the other hand, said, well, we do think that he actually committed an insurrection. But what the lower court said, what the district court said was, but we're not really sure he's an officer of the United States because of the language of the way the amendment is written. Not sure if the president of the United States is an officer. So they said, therefore, yes, he did an insurrection, but he's not an officer, so this doesn't apply to him, so never mind. Well, the Colorado Supreme Court then looked at it and said, well, actually, the president of the United States is an officer of the United States. And so, therefore, this ruling, if you say that it's an insurrection and you say that he's an officer of the United States, then therefore the 14th Amendment, Section 3 applies to Trump, and therefore he's now banned from being on the ballot. That is what happened in Colorado. So crazy that the lower court said, yes, it's an insurrection. And then the Supreme Court said, well, then he's also an officer of the United States. We're not going to squabble about that. So he therefore cannot be on the ballot. However, they also stated they understand the sensitivity of this. And so that is why they're putting a stay on the decision until an appeal can be had, because they do believe, obviously, that there will be an appeal on this. They figure it's going to go to the Supreme Court of the United States. And so they're saying because of that, they're not comfortable with really, truly removing his name from the ballot at this point until an appeal process can be had. I think they probably figure that they will lose on this, but they said we're cognizant that we travel in uncharted territory and that this case presents several issues of first impression. But for our resolution of the elector's challenge under the election code, the secretary would be required to include President Trump's name on the 2024 presidential primary ballot. So to maintain the status quo, pending any review by the U.S. Supreme Court, we stay our ruling until January 4th, which is the day before the secretary's deadline to certify the content of the presidential primary ballot. And if review is sought in the Supreme Court before the stay expires, then the stay shall remain in place. So if he doesn't appeal, then it will remain in place. So this is going to be very interesting to see this play out. We do still expect his name to end up on the ballot. However, the Republican, now Vivic Ramaswamy says, I'm not going to, fine, if Trump can't be in it, I'm not going to be in it. Because smart, Vivic is not running for president, really, in my opinion. He's running for vice president or for a nice cabinet position in the Trump administration. So he's very smart to be in solidarity. People have criticized him for it, thinking, don't throw yourself all the way under the bus just for Trump. And I think Vivic is playing this smart because he understands the writing on the wall of what's likely to happen. But the Republican Party of Colorado has said, no need, Vivic. If Trump can't be on the ballot, we're not going to even have a primary. We're going to move to a caucus system. So if they move to a caucus, then Trump would obviously be in that. He can't be on any ballot, but he could be in the caucus. And then if he wins, then the issue would be whether or not his name would appear on the general election ballot in Colorado. And if this ruling stands, he would not be on that ballot in Colorado. But of course, you would imagine that there would be a lot of write-ins, and I would imagine a lot of people would, I think a lot of people who would otherwise vote for it. I mean, this could be the biggest blunder for Colorado. This could be the first time that state suddenly turns red for Donald Trump, because I think there would be even a lot of independents and Democrats, even out of principle, who would be so disgusted by what's happened that would write his name in just out of principle of you cannot rob us of our right to vote for who we want, when we want, in this way. This is not the right way to do it. So I wouldn't be surprised if this backfires tremendously and Colorado actually goes Trump this time. Yeah, the idea is that, well, it wasn't ever going to go for Trump anyway, so it's not really a big loss for him. But it's the principle of it, because now other states are following suit. Now, of course, the states that are interested, that would be the most likely to ban Trump from the ballot, are states that he would never win anyway, like California and whatnot. We're going to get to that. But because there's more states that are looking to disqualify Trump, of course, after this, now you've got a bunch of Democratic states scrambling, saying, oh, great, this is like, Merry Christmas, everybody. This is a Christmas present. Come soon. And now we can maybe disqualify Trump from the ballot. They've been trying everything they possibly can to get rid of Trump, from double impeachments to numerous indictments to now trying to remove him, from the election process altogether. Well, they tried in a variety of ways. Nancy Pelosi and many Democrats, right after January 6th, absolutely looked at the 14th Amendment, Section 3, tried to invoke it and said, can we ban him from ever running because of that? Democrats absolutely did that. However, I want to point this out. The most recent attempts to ban Trump and the various states that have had to go through this process so far, it's been brought up by a Republican. Republicans have actually been the ones pursuing this. So if you think this is Democrats are the ones who have been wanting to dismantle democracy and undermine democracy, well, Republicans are right there with them. Many of those establishment Republicans are right there with them. John Anthony Castro is an American Republican politician and tax consultant. He has filed 27 lawsuits in the federal district courts across the country seeking to have Trump disqualified. Many of the states have already taken this case up, such as Maine, Oklahoma, Idaho, Pennsylvania, Utah, and New Hampshire. And Florida and Washington, D.C. as well. And they have been dismissed in those states at this point. Most of them citing that they do not think that, Trump has not been convicted of an insurrection, so you can't disqualify him for for a crime that he hasn't been actually convicted of. So this Republican has attempted to disqualify Trump in all of these various different states. Now, it's still being taken up by several states that he has filed. I mean, this is what he's filed in 27 states, and only 8 or 9 or 10 have actually ruled on it. So we're going to see more of these. And there probably will make the news now that I think a lot of people thought that there was no chance that any of this would ever go through. So none of it really made that much news. But now that Colorado has ruled the way that Colorado has, my guess is the subsequent states that are taking this up, we're going to start seeing those a little bit more in the news. The case now in Colorado, he did not do the Colorado case. The case in Colorado was actually done by Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, which is a left-leaning nonprofit. However, they filed this lawsuit on behalf of 4 Republicans and 2 independent voters. So no Democrats were involved actually in the Colorado lawsuit, except for the organization that filed it. But again, it was Republican voters who were in on trying to remove Trump from the ballot, and they did it successfully in Colorado's case. So this isn't a Democrat far left, just Democrats doing this. And this is, I think we all kind of initially, our knee-jerk reaction was to feel that way. But it turns out when you do a little deeper digging in this, that it's actually been primarily this John Anthony Castro, which he's backed by people. That there are a slew of Republicans. I mean, look, there wouldn't be such a huge push behind Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley at this point on the Republican Party, which Nikki Haley apparently is somehow caught up to Ron DeSantis in the polls. So that just goes to show how popular warmonger language, the candidate who says, I don't want I'm sick of talking about a Department of Defense. I want a Department of Offense, right? So it just goes to show how popular warmonger talk actually still is in the Republican Party. So she is caught up to Ron DeSantis. But look, Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley still continuing to run, continuing to have these debates. Ron DeSantis debating Gavin Newsom. Ron DeSantis going around and doing a foreign policy tour to Israel. All these things that we're seeing with these candidates and them effectively just really, they're not pulling the Vivic, right? Vivic is obviously, he's schmoozing Trump. He's trying to get into his cabinet, or he's trying to become a VP. But these others are just trashing Trump. They just really think he's going to be in the rearview mirror and that they themselves are going to end up being president of or the Republican nominee. Why would they think that? Why would they think that with Trump's popularity? Well, they would only think that if they believe that there's a chance Trump is not going to end up on the ballot and that he would somehow be disqualified entirely and one of them would end up actually the nominee for receiving the GOP nomination. That means that there are a lot of establishment Republicans out there who are in the shadows, very much in on trying to remove Trump from the ballot. I don't think that's a real surprise, but I think it's something that we should be reminded of as we look at these types of cases and these events that happen and think it's the Democrats, it's the far left, it's the liberals. It's not. It's the establishment. The establishment is going after anybody and everybody that they cannot control. The establishment is going after the anti-war voices. Not that Trump is necessarily anti-war, but he didn't start any new wars, and he probably would stop the ones that we're about to get into or the ones that we're currently in. He certainly has talked about ramping those down. So you've got, it's no secret that the establishment is totally and completely against Donald Trump. So just keep this in mind. It's not just Democrats, it's Republicans too. And a lot of them are shadowy and in the dark, and they're doing it behind his back, and they're banking on it, which is why they're continuing to go full bore into their campaigns, really genuinely believing they got a shot. And there's a lot of people around them who believe they have a shot as well. The Murdochs with Fox News, they went all in on Ron DeSantis. They didn't want to even discuss Trump on Fox News. One of the reasons why they got rid of Tucker Carlson, they just wanted to stop talking about Trump. They wanted to move on to Ron DeSantis, prop him up. They believed that their propaganda campaign touting Ron DeSantis would make the American people, they thought we were that manipulatable that they could just shove Ron DeSantis in our face and we would take him instead of Trump. That's what they believed. They believed that they just talked about him enough, people would just forget about Donald Trump. And that's just not what's happened. It turns out you can't control people as much as you think. Well, are you tired of being targeted with phishing emails? Are you fed up with spam cluttering your inbox? Are you concerned about companies like Google or the government spying on your private conversations? Then it's time to switch to Start Mail. Start Mail is a secure alternative to Gmail that lets you send emails like they're in a sealed envelope, making sure your communication stays private and secure. Services like Google collect your data and use it for targeted ads. Start Mail is a strictly ad-free service that does not collect or share any data with third parties for advertisement or tracking. Your Start Mail account comes with all the features you need, including unlimited disposable email addresses to protect your inbox from phishing scams and hacking attempts. Switching to Start Mail is super easy. So if you're worried about your old emails stored on Gmail or Outlook or Yahoo and more, well, they've got you covered. Start Mail's hassle-free migration tool lets you move your emails and contacts with just a few clicks, no technical knowledge required. Over the past decade, Start Mail has become a trusted name in email privacy, so why wait any longer? Switch to Start Mail and experience the peace of mind that comes with a truly secure email service. Sign up today and save 50% off your first subscription year. Go to startmail.com/Iverson and join millions of people who are moving away from big tech to secure email providers. That's Start Mail with a T, startmail.com/Iverson, and that link is down below.